Okay, welcome to another Blitz Game Jam project. This time, recreating another game of my youth, which was called Paratroopers. Although in this game, I think I called the project Paradrop. It was just an interesting sort of mental block that I have, obviously from childhood. And again, the premise is a very quick project, limiting myself to like 90 minutes, trying to focus on game mechanics and avoiding getting too bogged down in polish and sort of making things like look and feel nice. And I got to say, you'll probably notice from the time of this video that actually I was not very successful with that. So another thing is I actually started off with a blank project. You can see here I'm just whizzing through my content. So I've got a lot of like really nice free content from the Unreal Marketplace. And big shout out to Epic Games. They've been absolutely amazing over the life cycle of Unreal Engine 4, and they have through the ages provided a lot of like monthly free content. There is actually permanently free content on there as well, but every month you get a load of like a mix and match of really good stuff that you can flesh out projects with. And actually that's sort of what I did here. I started with a blank project, and a couple of months ago they had a lot of like military assets in the store, and you can see I'm just like adding like refueling tankers. I've got this anti-aircraft gun, and they came with animations and a whole load of stuff, so that was really cool. So basically the premise is you are an anti-aircraft gun and you have to shoot down helicopters which are sort of dropping paratroopers from the sky. And if four or more paratroopers land next to your gun, you're sort of on this raised platform, and they climb up and then blow you up. So it's basically like an early like third-person shooter, I guess. So you can see me setting up a player character, which is the anti-aircraft gun, and sort of adding this like raised platform with a camera out on a massive long boom. I did quite a bit of fettling here to try and get the sort of the player in frame. The problem with this is you sort of have to be able to see the ground, so you have to be able to see all the paratroopers that have successfully landed, and you also have to be like looking up at the sky as the helicopters are flying overhead. So here I'm just setting some basic control functions, some input things, and then like playing with some of the animations that came with the gun, adding also the like the buttons to elevate and lower the angle of the gun. I needed to, well, I didn't want to just shoot spheres, so I then thought I'd go into Blender and just add some like a rudimentary bullet shape thing. So that you can see me sort of modeling this a very simple cone into like a bullet. Very quick like auto UV unwrap. This was very very rough bit of CAD, and then just exporting into Unreal. And of course, you know, this is something if you is quite useful to be able to do the sort of integration with Blender is really quick and easy. You can generate a lot of really good content in Blender and import that very easily into the engine. Yeah, so here I was just checking out all of the animation blueprints for the gun that came with the content pack, and just then adapting the elevation to the control. And what I ended up doing is rather than sort of like specifying any particular angle or like having to do the work around this myself, I effectively just used the animation as the thing that drove the direction you were pointing. So the animation took a value from 0 to 1, and I think it elevated from like horizontal to about 85 degrees, and I just added sort of a set amount of increment there. You can see I think I incremented by like 10% each time of that 85 degrees, so it's whatever 8.5 degrees steps. That sort of thing is something that you would probably want to sort of adapt later on, because that's not, it's not It was quite coarse when I was testing it. It was quite difficult to get any sort of precision, which you'd probably want from the game. Here you can see I'm just adding like a simple transform on the transform socket on the gun, and that was to get a world space transform where I could spawn the bullets from. You can see I started off selecting like the wrong bone, and then eventually found the correct one, which unsurprisingly I think was labeled something like gun. But that you can just sort of see there. I'm whizzing through creating the shells from that point, and creating the shells with a parabolic trajectory, so they're actually sort of spawned with reasonably good ballistic trajectory. Next is creating helicopters. So again, this is from the content pack, like a fully animated Russian helicopter. And you can just see I was just creating some basic variables in C++ there for the helicopter class, and then adding a whole load of functions to get the helicopter to sort of fly along with all the animations running. And adding a function to basically open the rear cargo doors. So it had quite a cool animation where the rear cargo doors would sort of fly open. This is where I started getting really bogged down in this project, because playing with like the physics and the interaction with getting shot down was quite alluring in terms of just getting completely sucked into how to do this sort of crashing mechanic. And I spent a lot of time doing version 1, and then ended up chucking that in the bin, and I think I did like 2 or 3 more versions as I sort of refined the look and feel, but that really was against the principle of what I was trying to do with this project, and so it ended up just like going into a bit of spiraling a little bit out of control as I was sort of actually doing a bit more polish than I should have been doing, and that's, you can just sort of see that's what I'm doing here is sort of tweaking this the crashing mechanic, and then at some point I got back on track and created like a spawn zone so that I could keep spawning helicopters, and then went back to doing the crash physics. Yeah, so you can see this is just sort of combination of tweaking that spawn zone and playing with the crash mechanics. What was quite interesting with this project was, I've been using the engine for like 7 years now, and there's still sort of details around how the collision system works and collision settings. They can sort of can be quite idiosyncratic. So having, whether you have physics on or off, and then whether you move the actor, or whether you move the individual component, can change the sort of the expected, can change the behavior in ways that are slightly unexpected. And in the end, I completely turned physics off and just did everything fairly sort of by sort of direct brute force modeling of the interactions, and just had the bare minimum collision to fire off some events with, whether it got hit by a shell or whether it collided with another helicopter. So at this point, I think I'd got to the sort of the point where I'd got the collision more or less okay, and then I started working on the paratroopers, so the actual little characters that would drop out the back of the helicopter and slowly fall to the ground. I also got just distracted by playing the game, because I ended up then quite like enjoying just the mechanics of it, like the shooting mechanics, which maybe is a good sign, but was just sort of adapting the collision elements, what happened on collision, and then also spawning this little paratrooper dude, again from sort of content that was available in Marketplace. Then back into Blender and create a rudimentary parachute. I also got a little bit bogged down here again, trying to create an animated parachute. I'm trying to animate the sort of the opening of the parachute, and I sort of managed. I have done this before, but this time, really, what I needed to do was look up a training video again because this just sort of got stuck with the how to basically just how to import these animations. It's very easy, and you can find these sorts of things on YouTube. But for this project, again, just because I'm trying to be quick, don't really have time to do it. So, yeah, Paratrooper class here. This dude with his parachute, and basically he has to deploy the chute and then float down to the ground. Part of the original game was that you could basically shoot parachutes off the trooper, so you didn't necessarily have to hit the soldier. You could also hit the parachute, and then they would drop to the ground under gravity. And if they landed on one of their buddies on the ground, they would take him out as well. And that was a sort of mechanic that you would also use to, if you were close to having the critical number, you could hit the paratrooper's parachute, and he would fall onto his buddy and effectively gain you a bit more time by doing that. That was quite a significant element, or the sort of a higher level, sort of more skilled mechanic in the original game. So you can see here again, and this was another thing with the sort of collision and physics settings. I spent a lot of I sort of ate up a lot of time doing the collision with the parachutes, and also then sort of tweaking how quickly the parachute's deployed. Essentially, what I did with the parachute was, again, I was adding a world offset, and I just had a chute deployment factor, and that was just going to drive. That was going to drive both things. I was going to drive the animation, and that was then also going to drive effectively how the degree of world offset. So when the chute was deployed, then you basically slow down, so the sort of gravity vector would be reduced by a certain factor. And you can see there helicopters basically just dropping strings of paratroopers, and then I was working on what happens when they get hit by a shell, hit by a helicopter, and working on the functions, what to do on a collision. So here again, just like playing with the different collision settings, and slowly refining that. There you can see that factor which I was controlling the speed with, and then here adding what happens if the paratrooper actually gets hit by a shell. And you can see there that then finally I was being able to blat the paratroopers out of the sky. And then something really weird went wrong there, or happened there, where then the collision then turned off for some reason. That was very strange. And so then I was just doing some debugging around that. And then turned out that I sort of did it a slightly different way that was just more robust, and that was just adding, instead of relying on the mesh collisions, I then just added primitive components as collision objects, and that kind of just solved the whole thing. And again, it was the simple option, which I should have been trying to do right from the beginning, but I was basically I was tricked by essentially the content being so good that I was then relying on the meshes and the physics that came in the package to basically drive things, and they weren't quite set up for what I wanted, or what I needed them to do, or what I was trying to get them to do. So this is getting into the final throes of testing the collision for the paratroopers. You can see I just created 3 like dummies there, and was using them just to test the collision functions. And we're now getting into the final 10 minutes of the time that I set myself aside. Actually, I was way over time budget at this point. And then you can just see there, I just decided to make the paratrooper collision to drive it from a couple of really simple box primitives, and then played with some rotations, and then made the character line up, because I think I reset the mesh at some point. And there you can see I then started randomizing when the waves were created, the helicopter waves, and then it just gives you a bit more variation in how often the helicopters fly past. And you can see there I forgot to initiate on begin play. But once I solved that, then I had loads and loads of waves of helicopters, and eventually paratroopers dropping out of the sky. And it was at that point, not really having completed the mechanic, because of course there's no sort of end scenario. The game just runs to infinity, and there's no scoring or anything like that. But it was at that point that I decided that I had spent too much time on it. But effectively got to quite an interesting point, because I had I'd spent a lot of time actually just playing it, just playing the rough core loop of the game, which was shooting down helicopters, and that was quite interesting. So even though I'd sort of got bogged down in that sort of tweaking process, I still managed to sort of touch on something that was quite fun to play, or at least had the makings of something interesting. Anyway, that was Paradrop, or as it was actually called originally, Paratrooper.